Sweet, we're live. I'm Steve.
And I'm Tally from
Monday!
All right, joining us here today is Richard Carrier, historian, author of On the Can I say this word? Historicity?
Yeah, that's the one.
Of Jesus. Not the Impossible Faith, Proving History, Hitler, Homer, Jesus Christ, and
Hitler, Homer, Bible Christ.
Oh, it's Bible Christ?
Yes.
And Sense and Goodness Without God.
We're going to have to fire our research team.
This guy. To name a few. He's also a prominent debater, a badass atheist activist, and fellow Godless Rocker. Thanks, Richard, for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's fun. It's good to see you guys again after a long time.
Yeah, great to see you as well. So today we're going to be getting schooled in history, the mythical Jesus, and much more on today's episode of Godless Rockers.
Godless Rockers.
That's it. Also, we want to thank our patrons for helping us make these shows possible. Please support us on Patreon if you like what we do. We got links in the description below.
All right, Richard. So it's tradition. We like to start out our shows with a little game called This or That. Have you played that before?
I'm not sure.
Okay, so basically we give you two items and you have to pick which one you would want, and you'd have to live without the other forever.
Okay.
All right?
All right.
Okay, so here we go. The first this or that question is whiskey or wine?
Wow.
We came up with some hard ones for you.
I would have to choose wine because I'm more often in a wine mood than a whiskey mood, but I would miss the whiskey.
Mm-hmm. What kind of whiskey do you drink?
I'm usually a Scotchman or Irish whiskey. I just actually bought some surprisingly affordable Costco Glenlivet.
Yum. That's a good one.
And then right now I'm drinking Costco Tullamore Dew.
I love how you throw the Costco in there on all of these.
I'll throw it's Kirkland brand Irish whiskey, which is actually Tullamore Dew for those who know the secret. But that gigantic 1.75 liter bottle is like $25.
Oh, wow.
So, that's the good thing about Costco is you're not going to run out anytime soon.
Yeah. Well, they don't sell it here in Ohio because only government stores can sell. Only the state can sell liquor. Private companies can't. So Costco does not have a liquor section here. And so when I was on tour and I was stopping at Costco's to get cheap gas, I went in and I should check if they have alcohol. Every other state, right? And so sure enough, in Indiana, I got stocked up on a ton of freaking whiskey.
It's like a Costco case of whiskey.
Yeah.
Okay, well, don't overdo it. It sounds dangerous. That couldn't be in my house.
I stockpile. It'll be wet ages before I'm back out of state.
Yeah, I don't think you would see me tomorrow if I had that in my home.
That stockpile, it'd be hard to keep a job.
I would not survive. Okay. All right, so are we ready for question number 2, this or that?
Let's do it.
All right. This one's a tough one. U2 or garbage?
U2 or garbage?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have to say garbage.
Oh, why that?
I like the grunge, their sort of quirky style more than U2. Although U2 is really freaking good. And it might be different if the question was live or recorded.
Oh, live you'd go U2?
U2 is fucking amazing live.
So you've been to their concerts then, I'm guessing?
No, I've seen them live by broadcast.
Is that really live? You're not there.
I have not seen garbage live. So. It's not quite the same as being in concert. The only ones I've seen actually really live would be like other bands that I like even more, which would be like I was just talking about
us, right?
Yeah, that's right. I have heard you guys play live.
Yeah. You were at our album release party. Yes. You did a good speech.
Yeah. It was good for good dancing. That was great.
Oh,
All right.
Fun.
All right, but I have to say between U2 and garbage, I have to say garbage.
Okay.
All right.
I would agree with you on that one. All right. Number 3 is Fargo or Fight Club.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, these are tough, but I would have to say Fight Club.
All right. Just because it's so iconic.
I mean, this is easier because I've seen them both, so I don't have to see them again.
True.
So which one would I want to watch again for nostalgic or philosophical reasons? And I think Fight Club would be the one.
I'm with you on that too.
Got it.
All right, here we go. Number 4, the most difficult question of all. Top or bottom? Steve actually came up with for you, we should say. Or in the middle. Or in between. I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah, well, okay,
I wasn't going to ask that one.
These can mean a variety of
laughing about it.
They can mean a variety of different things. So
that's true.
That's very
depends
true.
on interpretation. But if the question were missionary or cowgirl, I would have to choose cowgirl.
Cowgirl?
I mean, not me and cowgirl, but woman on top.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. That was okay. Next question. Okay, so your living room, Xmas tree or Festivus pole?
Christmas tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have one now already?
No, I've been out of town and I'm not going to do one this year. But I do really love the nostalgia and aesthetics of a good Christmas tree.
Yeah, we just got one this year. It's the first one we've had as adults. It's for Brage, really, but he loves the dang thing.
Yeah, it's a great pagan tradition. It's lovely.
Didn't
Pagans do aesthetics
up from the ceiling though, upside down or something like that?
That I don't know, but the Bible mentions some pagan groups just dressing up trees at where they stand rather than chopping them down. So with ornaments and things like that.
Oh, interesting.
I have not read that passage.
Oh yeah, it's condemned, of course. Christmas trees are condemned in the Bible.
Okay.
Really?
Yeah, it says do not do as the heathens do and hang ornaments on trees and whatnot. Yeah, it's actually in there.
What?
Wait, let me see if we can find the passage.
Thank you for yet another of a million things that is in my brain rattling around about why things do make absolutely no sense about that religion.
Here it is. It's Jeremiah 10. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see, where is it? Okay.
Wait. Jeremiah, is that New Testament or Old Testament?
That's Old Testament, of course.
Oh, see, they dismissed
so this
that whole
predates
thing,
Jesus.
most of it.
Yes, it does.
The rule not to have Christmas trees. Doesn't that kind of make it?
Well, they didn't have Christmas trees for hundreds of years, even after Jesus. So that was definitely a pagan tradition that got introduced.
Right.
Trying to find the passage. It's in here somewhere. It doesn't matter. Okay, it's in there though. Jeremiah 10.
So congratulations, you won the game.
was that a game one wins?
Exactly.
Everybody wins.
Everybody wins on our
Everybody
show.
wins, yes. Huzzah!
Unless I disagree with them on point, then I must fool them on that.
We still let them win anyway.
You passed. Yeah,
okay,
we
cool.
Them win. Okay.
Groovy.
So moving on to some more serious questions here. Thank you for playing that game with us, by the way. It was fun.
So we'll go with the first question here. You often say that the mainstream consensus amongst scholars is that the magical Jesus, as in the one that was the Son of God, did a bunch of miracles, and rose from the dead, never existed. If this is so, why aren't there like 2 billion more atheists on our side? Or is there something that these Christians know that all you historians have missed?
Okay, yeah, that's gosh, yeah. That's a question in like the anthropology of religion, right? Like why are there billions of Muslims and Buddhists and Hindus and Christians if this is all bunk? And it totally is. People just aren't critical thinkers and aren't taught to be critical thinkers. In fact, they're untaught Like they're punished for being critical thinkers usually. So I think that, and people need their religions for certain things. They've decided to use it as a security blanket for whatever thing it is, whether it's community or immortality or whatever thing they're dealing with. So people are very reluctant to get rid of and give up on these things and actually face the hard reality and the hard questions of life and philosophy and things like that. So I think that's why people stick with religions, and then they rationalize away all the bad evidence and stuff. And of course, yeah, the mainstream scholarly consensus is that magical Jesus, God Jesus, did not exist. But the mainstream consensus, the widest mainstream consensus, is still that there was a dude, Jesus, but that he got all this legend and myth piled on top of him, that he was really just a preacher, an apocalyptic prophet, and so on, just like any other in history. Now, of course, I'm, as you know, one of the small selection of scholars who actually think even that Jesus might not have existed. But if you're going to cite the consensus and say, well, the consensus says, then you really also have to agree that the consensus says that Jesus was not God and most of the Gospels are fiction. So you can't have it both ways. So if you're a Christian and you want to lean on the consensus, you're in trouble, basically.
Interesting. My, sorry to interject here.
No, go for it.
So my brother is super Christian. And he has studied, he's really trained in apologetics and everything. And he's studied all of these, what he calls historians. And the historians all agree that there is mountains of evidence for Jesus having existed and done everything that the Bible says he did, pretty much.
Oh, yeah, right.
So
Okay.
where is he getting this information? Who are these historians?
Yeah. Well, he's citing other Christian apologists, right? Not mainstream experts in the field. But no, the evidence is actually quite dismal compared to other things. And certainly for the miracles, like for the miraculous stuff, we don't have any actual eyewitness accounts. We don't have any narratives from eyewitnesses at all. And the accounts we have are just patently ridiculous and contradictory and all of that. So all of the things that would normally lead to an honest historian saying this is super dubious is there presently. So the debate over whether there's enough to agree that there was at least some guy that all of this stuff piled up on top of, the evidence for that is not very great either, because it's all questionable. It's all dubious, is tainted evidence. Basically, it's like a legal case where all the evidence has been tainted by police corruption. So you can't use any of the evidence because it's all corrupt. And so it's that kind of situation where we don't really have uncorrupted, reliable evidence to really make decisions about this kind of thing from. Unlike many other historians, or historical figures, on my blog, people keep throwing, "Oh, what about Hannibal? What about Socrates?" and so on. And I've done blog articles on all of these, or put material in my book on the Historicity of Jesus and all these other figures, and showing that we actually have pretty good evidence that they existed. And it's the kind of evidence we don't have for Jesus. So even for the mundane Jesus, the evidence is weak. But once you start talking about supernatural Jesus, the evidence is worse than weak. And that's, like I said, the mainstream scholars all agree on that. It's only the Christian fundamentalists and apologists who want to create their own systems, their own universities, and their own journals, and just like they do for creationism, to argue the contrary.
Yeah, well, kind of like the debate you did with William Lane Craig, right? Where this is something, now correct me if I'm wrong, but this is pretty much every debate he does. Let me set the ground rules after I presuppose that I'm right. I'm going to presuppose that I'm right about something, and you can only disagree with me if you follow these rules that I set that are completely arbitrary, that can't be disproven because they follow my logical fallacy. Is that pretty much William Lane Craig in a nutshell, or did I miss something?
I mean, it's kind of. I mean, he does use. I mean, he was a professional debater before he became a Christian.
Oh, that's interesting. I thought that's all he did was Christian apologetics.
Well, no, I mean, he was a highly skilled, trained debater, and so when he went into Christianity, he just applied the skill to Christianity, and it's all a game to him, really. Like it's all about how do you win, how do you frame the debate, how do you try to get them to not run out of time. How do you prevent them from bringing up their points? I mean, it's all tactics. It's not actually trying to learn what's true. It's all about how do you win. And I find that a bit slimy, actually.
Oh, I do too. Every time I see him, well, first, I just think it's really weird to presuppose something that there's no evidence for. But he'll always be like, but that's not what we're here to debate today. We're here to debate this other thing.
Yeah.
We're not here to debate my presuppositions. We're here to debate what has been established.
He uses that tactic too. When I debated him, I originally wanted the debate to be about are the Gospels reliable? I wanted that to be the debate topic, and he refused. He only wanted to do the resurrection, refused to do the question of whether the Gospels are reliable sources, even though that's a fundamental presupposition that you have to depend on for his argument. It's like we should be talking about that first before we even get to the question of whether anything in them that's said in them is true. Mm-hmm. And so, but no, he will only do his prepackaged debates. He won't go out of he won't go off book, as it were, or will avoid doing so as much as he can.
Well, that actually makes sense according to what I'm saying, because he's presupposing that the books are true, therefore the resurrection happened. Whereas if you were actually to debate the veracity of the books and where they come from, that would be a completely different argument and way harder to support without that presupposition.
Yeah, and you start talking about, well, actually, what are the standards in the field of history? You start looking at other examples of where historians are doubtful of their sources, and you look, it's the same standards that apply to the Gospels. It starts to fall apart once you start making it about the reliability of the sources, which is where history is supposed to start anyway. You can't skip that step.
Well, I failed history, so.
Did you literally fail history?
I did. I failed almost all the classes, actually. I was a really bad student. Only class I was good in was math for the solids. I would either get an A or an F, and I would get A's in math. In fact, I was a grade ahead in math, but everything else I failed, even science. And I had my biology partner was the valedictorian of my high school A+ student. She was my partner, and I still got an F.
They were trying to help you out.
She got an A+. Like, that's how bad. Yeah.
That's why we play rock music and don't do lectures.
There you go.
We do sometimes, sort of. We did a speech once.
About how atheism needs more rock music.
It's okay.
That's right. Yeah.
We do our own thing.
Well, you do the music well. I can say that.
We do the music, and we ask smart people to come on our show and talk about things.
That's your guys' job.
Right on. Yeah, I happily take up that burden. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. No, I actually did okay in history, but I think I probably know less than you.
Yeah. You know a lot, though. You know a lot. He shocks me all the time.
No.
Okay.
I know a little bit. What inspired you, actually, since we're on this subject of history, what inspired you to major in ancient history and focus so much on Christianity?
Well, yeah. When I graduated high school way long ago in another century, if someone told me that I was going to be a historian, I would have said, no fucking way. Like, history's super boring. Because in high school, it was just taught names and dates at memorization. It wasn't interesting to me at all. When I went back to college, and that was many years later, I went off and joined the military and did some other things before going back to school. Then I was doing all the general ed stuff and did all the history courses requirements for college. And then I fell in love with history because that was way more interesting. It was about cause and effect, about why these things happened, and why things are the way they are. And it was about method. How do we know these things happened? And those are way more interesting questions. And when I was falling in love with history, I also fell in love with the cultural unit in Western Civ for ancient Rome. I said, this is a neat culture. I really like this. I'd love to study this. And at the same time, I was getting involved in the atheism movement more. I was doing stuff for the secular web, for example, and things of that nature. And so I decided I could kill two birds with one stone. I could do something I'm passionate about and get all the background skill and become basically a support artillery for the atheist movement and be someone who does a PhD in ancient history and apply my skills that way. And then I could do things. I would have the languages, I'd have the literary background and so on. I could talk about, well, when are the Christian apologists lying to you about what the Greek says or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. So I can actually fact check them. And that, of course, led me to be more successful in counter apologetics. I became an expert in resurrection apologetics, for example. That's how I ended up debating William Lane Craig on that subject. And so that's how I got involved in that. And then the big thing that I got most famous for recently was the historicity of Jesus question, which I was actually pro-historicity for the longest time. I thought mythicism was crank and ridiculous, and a lot of it is crank and ridiculous. But someone convinced me that there was at least one plausible argument you could get rid of all of the crankery and amateurism, and there's actually an argument that holds up. And I was like, well, okay, I'm about 50-50 on that maybe. But I just left it there. But then in 2008, when I got my PhD, that's when the economy collapsed and it was freeze on hires for humanities majors. So job market was crap, basically. So I went to my fans and said, hey, if you can help me pay down my remaining student debt, I will apply my PhD to any subject you want. And they raised the money and unanimously said Historicity of Jesus. They did not say that I had to come to any conclusion. They just said, whatever your conclusion is, we just want to see a peer-reviewed book that honestly looks at this. And so I did. And so that was 6 years of my life working on that project, resulted in multiple books, but most especially on the Historicity of Jesus, which is peer-reviewed book published by the respected academic biblical press, Sheffield Phoenix. So that kind of sort of changed the game, because that was the first time anyone had published this argument, an argument for the non-existence of Jesus through peer review. No one had ever done a proper academic press peer-reviewed book on it. And so now that really is, people need to address that book now. That's the best case there is for it in print. And that's thanks to my fans for funding my research to accomplish that.
Wow, that's such a cool story. I didn't even realize how that all came about. That's so interesting.
Now, to kind of follow up on that, I'm going to ask you a weird question. But
right on.
So I think in one of your speeches or something, you said something about basically now the scholarly understanding of Moses is that he was a fictional character. He's mythological. He didn't actually really exist. This was brought up in the 70s.
Yeah, the first serious challenge, the first peer-reviewed challenge to the Historicity of Moses was Thomas Thompson's dissertation back in the 70s, and he was vilified and attacked, and people tried to destroy his career. So there was a huge pushback by the biblical studies community against him and his thesis, but after about 2 decades, his thesis is now the mainstream consensus. The mainstream consensus is that Moses is a historical figure. Actually, is a mythical figure. Actually, all the patriarchs are just mythical characters that were invented to sell a particular view of the history of Judaism, and that these aren't histories and aren't historical people. Of course, that's a memo that most of the public doesn't get usually, but it really does rile up Christians when you point this out. I mean, they really don't like it. I was in a debate in Southern California a few years back, debating the historicity of Jesus with young Earth creationists, which is the worst, the worst juxtaposition to do. But I had just one throwaway line in my opening about how, well, it's analogous to the case for Moses that, people resisted the idea that Moses didn't exist, and now it's the mainstream consensus that he didn't exist, or that we can't establish that he did. And they couldn't let that go. So they went up and they burned almost all their clock time at the podium arguing for the historicity of Moses. So I got to be able to go up there and go like, well, we're not here to talk about that, actually. We're here to talk about Jesus. So thanks for burning clock time. Let's go back to the thing we're here to debate. But I also threw away a quick argument or two as to why their defenses of historicity of Moses didn't hold up either. Because it did parallel to their sort of implausible case for the historicity of Jesus. It's based on a lot of sham scholarship and bad logic and wishful thinking. And like you said, relying on undefended presuppositions. Right.
Well, I wondered because, it took, you said 20 years for the scholarly acceptance of the idea that, Moses is just a mythical figure. I would think that Jesus might actually be a harder pill to swallow, even for those in that field. Do you see this being something that might take a little bit longer to accept that he may have just been a mythical figure? Or
it could, yeah, very well could, because so much of departments, colleagues, funding, so much of the industry of biblical studies is backed and basically built on the backs of Christian donors and Christian supporters. So,
that's not good.
So so even if you're a secular professor at a roughly secular university, you can't avoid offending people who can actually make things hard for you in terms of getting published or getting conference invites and things like that, and getting grants especially. So there can be a huge resistance to this. But even not only do you have religious resistance, and so because Christians are so integrated in the political control system of our society and our economy, not only you have that, but you also have secularists who have this sort of ideological opposition to mythicism because they think it makes atheism look bad, or because it makes it difficult to get along with Christians. So even atheists want to like destroy any challenge to the historicity of Jesus because it makes their attempt to be diplomatic with other Christians difficult, or it makes whatever kind of mission they have for promoting humanism and things like that difficult. So they don't like it, even though it doesn't really matter whether Jesus existed or not for their worldview. They also have a sort of ideological presupposition against it. And so you run into a lot of opposition, more than you do for Moses, although the pushback on Moses was huge. I mean, Thomas Thompson, it's such a famous story in the biblical studies community. Everybody remembers what happened to Thompson. And it's kind of like a mark of shame. Like people talk about it like it's something, why did we do that? We were horrible people back then. But people remember that. And that's another sort of reason why a lot of scholars won't go public. I know some scholars who are at least agnostics about historicity, but won't publicly say it because they don't want the backlash. They don't want to be Thomas Thompson. And that's starting to change slowly. So like, since when I published, there's about 4 of us fully qualified experts who doubted historicity. There's now about 12 who are on the record doubting, at least admitting that historicity agnosticism is plausible, that it deserves a place at the table of academic discussion, or they are agnostics themselves about historicity. So it's already, that's only been 4 years since I published the book. So we've already gone from 4 to 12. So let's see where we are 10 to 20 years from now.
Yeah, that's totally awesome.
Yeah, and just real quick, could you explain, maybe just a few reviewers may not have heard, why it would be plausible that Jesus didn't exist? Can you just really quickly explain that?
Yeah, all the evidence we have for an actual walking around Earth Jesus, the Galilean Jesus, the Jesus who was on Earth talking to people on Earth, not as a revelatory being, but as an actual man, all of it is based on the Gospels. All the Gospels are just redactions of Mark. So really, all the evidence for the historical Jesus is one Gospel, the Gospel of Mark. Everything else is just a riff, an expansion on that. And Mark is highly fictional, not written by an eyewitness, not written by a Palestinian, not written in the language of the people who would have known Jesus. It was written in a foreign land by a foreigner, for foreigners, a lifetime after the fact, with no cited sources. So that's one of the worst situations to be in. Yeah. On top of that, we know all these other mythical heroes, especially savior gods, because savior gods were all the rage at this time. Personal saviors were a thing. There's tons of these religions. Judaism is really the last one to come up with their own, which is Christianity. All these other local religions, the Egyptian and the Persian and and various others, came up with savior cults before them. But their savior gods are also non-existent people who are also put in history with stories about them interacting on Earth or doing things on Earth. So we have precedent as well. And then on top of that, when you go to the earliest literature, you look at the authentic letters of Paul, there's no clear reference to a Jesus on Earth. It's all revelatory Jesus. It's revelation, secret messages in Scripture. There's only like a few passages that have ambiguous meaning that one can maybe try to argue that Paul knew Jesus had family. But those passages are deeply problematic. They're not clear-cut the way people think they are. And once you realize that they don't support one case or the other, because of their ambiguity, the evidence in Paul looks very, very strange, actually. Like he never talks about Jesus as a preacher, never talks about Jesus having a ministry, never talks about being a miracle worker or being an exorcist or a healer, never talks about Jesus teaching parables, never mentions anyone having sat at the feet of Jesus and heard him preach. There's no references, and no one asks questions either. No one's challenging Paul by saying, I know this guy who's heard Jesus say such and such. You don't see that. There's no questions about like, well, so how did Jesus bear up under the torment of the trial and the crucifixion? They never ask questions about this. No one ever challenges any of these things because it doesn't seem that anybody knows these stories really about a historical Jesus. So now, of course, they believed in a historical Jesus in the same sense they believed in a historical Satan, that they thought he was a real divine being. But he was only known through communications, through revelation. So you had to be an apostle. You had to be chosen by Jesus to see Jesus. Only apostles got to see Jesus and got to see him in some sort of visionary or dream state. So that's the alternative origins of Christianity, the alternative theory, which is it started revelatory, and like all other savior gods, he got turned into a historical figure later. And then the sect that was pushing the historical version That's the sect that won out and destroyed all the other sects and got rid of their literature. So we don't get to hear about the original sects or any of the other sects that were going against this view of things, except in little hints here and there that we have. And I talk about all of this, the evidence and the state of things and the alternative theory and why it's plausible in my book on the historicity of Jesus, which that's where people should start, I think, if they really want to dive into this.
Mm-hmm. It sounds so interesting. I don't usually find history interesting, but this is fascinating stuff. I do have a weird question. I thought, or I was told, I heard, I don't know, maybe this is just rumor and you can dispel it for me, but
it's this is a classic line in ancient literature that it starts with "they say."
Yeah.
But go on, yeah.
Or I've heard.
Whoever they are, yeah. It is said.
Exactly. So is it true that like in that era of when Jesus supposedly was here and alive, Jesuses were kind of running rampant? There was a lot of people running around saying, I'm the savior, or I have magical powers and stuff like that, right? What's that about?
If you want a really fun talk, if you haven't already seen it and you want to see something fun about history, go look at my Wichita Rapture Day talk. You can just do Richard Carrier Rapture Day Wichita. It's on YouTube in various forms. It's a humorous talk, but the whole talk, that was Rapture Day when camping declared that was going to be the day the world would end. So everybody was expecting the world to end that day. And so Wichita brought me out to give a talk on apocalypticism. And so while we're sitting there waiting for the world to end, while I'm talking about why people think the world is going to end. And so I talk about the origins of apocalypticism and how the Jews kept failing to predict the apocalypse. They kept doing what Harold Camping did and said, it's going to end now, and it didn't. And so they keep reinterpreting the scripture to try and push the date further in the future, keep kicking the can down the road, and accidentally caused Christianity, because Christianity is one of these attempts to correct a failed prediction, a multiply failed prediction. And so that's really what Christianity is caused by, this Jewish apocalypticism, which stemmed out of Zoroastrian apocalypticism. It was actually a pagan idea originally. It came from Persia, this idea that God would burn the world up and create a new world and resurrect everybody. That wasn't Jewish. That was actually Persian. And then when the Jews got in exile under the Persian rule, they realized that the Persians had a much better God than them. So they basically stole everything and put it on their God. Said, no, our God is as good as your God. Our God's going to burn everything up and make a new world and resurrect everybody. And that's where the whole resurrection apocalypticism came from. But the interesting thing is, when you look right around the time of Jesus, it's certainly the early first century, if you put it all as like the first 50 years of that century, there were a bunch of these guys. We have evidence of it in Josephus especially. There are a bunch of these guys going around portraying themselves as the new Joshua. So they're going to do things like part the Jordan or knock down the walls of Jerusalem. They're going to do all these things that Joshua did, right? So they're portraying themselves as Joshua. Now, Joshua is Jesus. It's the same name. In English, they just get written differently, but actually Jesus is Joshua. It's the name Joshua. So there were these guys portraying themselves as the new Jesus. New Jesus, meaning the original Jesus was the Jesus that led the Jewish armies to conquer, Palestine in that fictional account of the conquest of Canaan. But they're also portraying themselves as messiahs. They're going to bring about the end of the world. So they're chosen by God to do this. That makes them a messiah, which that's what the word Christ means. It means anointed, which means messiah, which messiah means anointed in Hebrew. It's the same word. So there were a bunch of these guys who were basically portraying themselves as Jesus Christs. So there were a ton of Jesus Christ at the time. Now they weren't themselves named Jesus. Yeah. They weren't named Jesus, but they were basically selling themselves as a Jesus Christ. And there are a lot of these. So I think that's the next most likely hypothesis. Like, if mythicism is not true, if there really was a historical Jesus at the root of Christianity, he would have been one of these guys, just another one of these guys, and just the one whose sect got lucky and stuck around where the others didn't. So it's like they're all trying. So you have all these fires and all these irons in the fire, and like any other like restaurants in Manhattan, like one shall survive and the rest will fall. Will go out of business. Right? So like as long as there's tons of people trying, one of them's going to succeed. So it's really just luck that it was the Christian sect that did. Now, alternatively, if Jesus didn't exist historically, what Christians were doing was inventing a better Jesus Christ. It's not an actual dude, but a heavenly being that they could know through revelations and therefore be absolutely certain is real and really accomplished his mission. So they were basically trying to come up with a better Jesus Christ, one that wasn't human and flawed in those ways. So either one is possible. Either of those scenarios could explain the origins of Christianity.
That's so interesting that, it's so hard even today to look back and see if there's a real Jesus. Even at the time, you're like, who's the real Jesus?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Then,
Exactly.
It's confusing.
So, if I'm understanding correctly, there was definitely a bunch of historical Jesuses, but not necessarily one that we could point to.
That's right. Yeah, not the one that's linked to Christianity. No, not at all. There is a Jesus that gets used as a model. Several scholars have written about this under peer review, and I cite them and talk about it on the Historicity of Jesus. There's this Jesus right around the Jewish War. This is the 60s AD. This is about 30 years after Christianity already began. Jesus ben Ananias. And he goes through this. He's this guy who's proclaiming woe to Jerusalem. He's like this apocalyptic prophet. The Jews don't like him, so they question him, and he's won't respond to them. So they turn him into the procurator, the prefect, and he won't talk to him. And so the procurator lets him go. The prefect lets him go. And then eventually he's killed by a siege engine. A giant rock crushes him during the siege of Jerusalem.
That's way better than the cross.
Yeah, well, yeah, torsion catapults. I got to tell you about that. But anyway, that's another thing that's an area of interest of mine, ancient science and technology. But so the storyline that's told matches about 20 points of similarity with the Jesus crucifixion story. And I think things have been changed out. Stuff has been borrowed from the Psalms and things like that to color it out and make it a different story. But it looks like Jesus ben Ananias was used as a model for constructing the death story, used by Mark for constructing the death story of Jesus, the Jesus Christ that started Christianity. Whether Jesus existed or not, he wasn't Jesus ben Ananias, but that story was used to create a story for him, which is, so when you say there were lots of Jesuses, yes, there were even more Jesuses than we were just talking about.
The torsion catapult version seems like a very unlikely way to execute somebody, though.
Well, it wasn't an execution; it was a siege. So he was just randomly killed. Okay. So yeah, they were attacking Jerusalem, and he just happened to be in the way. So, according to the story, mind you, the story might not even be true, but that's the legend. Is that he was killed.
Way more believable.
It is actually the account of the crucifixion does not match up with how we know Jewish law and Roman procedure worked, but that's a whole other story.
Indeed. All right. Well, so I kind of want to get to this because we're on the internet, so we have to deal with Hitler.
Outstanding. Yeah.
So invoking Hitler is one of the most cliche moves for any internet troll, trying to prove why atheism brings on immorality.
Ah, yes.
Does this hold up to any kind of scholarly scrutiny?
No. In so many ways, like you could pick a better example. You could say Stalin, for example. Stalin's a better example of an atheist who did horrible things, but he didn't do them in the name of secular humanism. He just happened to be an atheist. He wasn't using an atheist ideology particularly to justify his crimes. And even if you argue that he did, then that's just a perverse, an evil ideology that you should reject. Atheism doesn't lead to everyone being Stalin, basically. So
because I had this argument with somebody, and I'm just going to make this point, and maybe you'll know about it, maybe you won't. But didn't Stalin kind of prop up the Orthodox Russian Church during the Second World War? And doesn't that kind of diffuse that point?
Yes. Yeah, he was just like Hitler. He used the church to his own ends, and the church gleefully cooperated. Because the church has never been an upstanding moral institution throughout history. Most of the churches backed Hitler. Some churches stood up to Hitler though, and then got wiped out. The Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, were thrown into concentration camps because they would not cooperate with Hitler's regime. But a lot of the larger mainstream churches did follow along. The Catholic Church even signed treaties with Hitler and we're cool with you as long as we get to have our schools under your Third Reich when you conquer the world. That was basically the Concordats decision between them. But no, the usual argument is that Hitler was an atheist and therefore somehow, especially a Darwinist, they'll say, and then therefore that's what leads to his eugenics program and all that. Hector Avalos actually wrote a really great chapter on this in The Christian Delusion, a book edited by John Loftus. It's got a chapter by me on the resurrection apologetics, another chapter on ancient science, incidentally, so a tie-in there. But also Hector Avalos' chapter on Hitler, where he shows that Hitler's program against the Jews lined up item by item by item with Martin Luther, the founder of Protestantism, with Martin Luther's program against the Jews, and did not line up in any way with Darwin's teaching. So it's like it's all yeses and all nos, no Darwinism, all Lutheranism. So Hitler's program was Christian. Hitler was killing people, killing Jews, engaging in mass murder on behalf of Jesus Christ, using a twisted version of Christianity. And then the debate becomes, what were Hitler's actual personal beliefs? And I've written about this. Weirdly, it's one of the rare occasions where I'm actually an expert in Hitler studies, but only on this one very narrow subject. Because Dan Barker of FFRF, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, kept getting these quotes sent at him of Hitler supposedly representing himself as an atheist. And so Barker, at the time, I was going through grad school at Columbia University. Barker knew at the time that I was doing that. And he says, hey, I know you read scholarship in German and stuff like that. Could you just go look at the original German and tell me if these translations are bogus or if they're taken out of context? And there were three lines, three sentences basically. And I said, oh, sure, I'll do that for $50. So FFRF cut me a check for $50. And that was a huge rabbit hole. That turned out to be way more complicated than I thought.
And like $5,000,
right.
2 months of your life.
Yeah, no, really. The end result was I discovered that there was a thing in Hitler studies that was unknown to Hitler historians. And I even asked like major experts, like, did you discover this thing that I've discovered? And I think, no, you better publish this. So I did. So I'm published in German Studies Review. I have a peer-reviewed article on what's called Hitler's Table Talk, which was this collection of rants. When Hitler was in the bunker in Poland during the war, through most of the war, he would just rant just randomly on various subjects during lunch or tea, sometimes at midnight, like whatever. And so Martin Bormann, his secretary, wanted to collect these rants and edit them up to be the new manifesto for the victorious Third Reich. And so he collected these rants. He had these stenographers like take them down and transcribe them and stuff. And there's a lot of questions as to what happened to this manuscript. It got edited a little bit by Bormann. Different pieces of it went to different places. There's different versions that don't agree. So there's a lot of like complexity. But the big find was that the English translation, there's only one now. There's supposedly going to be a new one coming out, but the only English translation is fraudulent. It actually does not correctly translate the German. It actually translates the French, which was a French translation of the German, that was fraudulent by this weird neo-Nazi. Well, he was a Nazi and unrepentant Nazi to his death in the 90s. Financier of terrorists. He was a Swiss banker called Francois Gernoud, who
Sounds
laundered. Yeah, I know, right? He laundered money for the Nazis from they would go and kill Jews, steal all their art and jewels and stuff, and he would use Swiss banks to launder the Nazi money. That's what he did during the war. And then he started collecting Hitler memorabilia after the war. So he's famous for trying to gather up the Hitler diaries and all this stuff. So he's famous for creating the first translation of this. But then when the English translation came out, he claimed to have the most complete manuscript of the German and insisted that for the French part that he'd done, that they only translate from the French and not the German. And so it's this big scandal. So anyway, so I published this article and I exposed this through the analysis of the language. You can show that they were translating from the French because it matches the French exactly, not the German. But also they made mistakes in translating that only are possible from the French because of certain idioms that exist in French and not in German. Anyway, so I proved all this. That's in the article. And now Hitler historians have to have a footnote whenever they cite the Table Talk saying, Richard Carrier, you can't rely on the English, got to go to the German, etc. So I've actually impacted Hitler studies thanks to Dan Barker and FFRF's $50 check. And that article is in Hitler, Homer, Bible, Christ. So that's why Hitler is in the title of that book, is that German Studies Review article is in there with a follow-up, because now there's this professor in Sweden who's taken up the reins and done this whole Dan Brown thing on it now, where he's digging into archives, talking to witnesses and children of people involved in all this. So he's actually finding out more stuff. And in fact, I just got an email from him where he says he's published something new, and I haven't read it yet. So I'm really excited to get to that. As soon as we're done here, I'll probably go look and see.
Oh, that's great.
what he's done. But he's doing more and more stuff, all inspired by my article. And that's what scholars like me loved. Like, you do one little basic thing and say, hey, I can't carry this football any further. This is it. But can someone please do more research on this? And he's done it. So he's like building off of my work. So once again, thanks to Dan Barker and FFRS $50 check. So
that is so cool how science works like that.
Yeah.
Very awesome. I wish I could be a part of that world, that scholarly world.
It can be fun and boring.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, well,
what I tell people
anything.
when I was doing my dissertation, which was in ancient science, so my latest books are basically publishing my dissertation findings on science and technology in ancient Rome and science education in ancient Rome. But when I was doing it, I did it. Look, God, it took me like 10 years or something. And I explained to people, like, most of what I did, like 99% of what I did, was read books and articles to confirm that they're useless. So most of what you're doing is you go and look at this book or this article and say, okay, that's I have no use for this, but you have to have looked at it to confirm that it was useless. And so a lot of what you're doing is confirming that something is useless. In the process, you're reading all this other stuff that's unrelated to your dissertation, so your head gets filled with more and more knowledge. So it has its uses. But if you think of it like in terms, I could spend like days and days and days in the library and get nowhere, just reading articles and books just to confirm that I have no use for them. But then occasionally you find something really valuable and go, oh, excellent, I've got to put this in.
Can't you hire like a secretary or something to sort of like crumble through the garbage and find that
no, because they wouldn't have the skills to recognize what was important and what wasn't, right? So
that's true.
So yeah, you can't. No one else can do it. That's the whole thing. That's why what PhDs are for, is it teaches us how to do this and be skilled at it. And once you have it, then you can apply the PhD to do this research again on any other subject. So within that field. So. And I've done that on a variety of subjects.
To me, it sounds very similar to being an atheist and reading the Bible.
Yeah. Yes, right. That's what made me an atheist. Yes, there's nothing in there of any use to confirm that it's useless.
There is no gold nugget. No gold nugget. Moving on.
Nope. And even insofar as even if you try to argue there's gold nuggets in there, whatever it is has been better said by someone else somewhere else.
Well, so we've had 2,000 years or so to say it better, right?
Yeah.
Proverbs has some good stuff in there, though.
It does?
Well, yeah. I mean, like positive life living kind of.
Like what?
Advice. I don't know. What do you mean, like, put me on the spot?
Like what?
I'm not a Bible scholar.
I can trash anything in the Bible. I'll do it.
Really?
Give me anything that sounds good in the Bible, I'll trash it.
Yeah, so Google best proverbs.
Amazing, yeah.
See if there's a list of best proverbs, and then see what you can do with that. Yeah.
All right. Well, ask him another question
while he's doing that. For reals, we're gonna do this. That was actually it for our questions, but we have a couple of
And if I can, I'll ask Richard for a layup.
For a what?
A layup.
I don't know what that is.
I don't know any off the top of my head.
But no, I'll look them up. If I can't trash them, I'm going to ask you for a layup.
I see.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've had several questions here on the live stream. I'll go ahead and read one of these to you. What does Richard... Oh, wait, this comes from 23... What does it say? I'm so sorry. I need my glasses.
23 yuvas? I don't know what that means.
There it is. But the question is, what does Richard think of Richard Friedman's book, Who Wrote the Bible?
Oh, gosh, that's
I've not heard of this.
Let me reacquaint myself.
So I don't know.
All right. Well, while you're doing that, I have some proverbs.
Yeah.
Right?
Get the Lord stuff.
Well, that's the number one proverb. All right. Okay. So trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not unto your own understanding. Use reason, people. Don't trust those fuckers. All right. How about this one? This one's about raising your kids.
Start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. So it's like brainwash them.
Brainwash those kids.
Yeah.
Of course, this one ends up not being true because Tally and I are here before you today. All right, next. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Do I even need to address that one?
Self-refuting there. Okay, go on.
A wife of noble character who can find? She is worth far more than rubies.
You gonna disagree with that, mister?
You can find wives of noble character. So who can find? I can find them right here. I found one. Wasn't that hard?
About that.
So yeah,
I'm not very noblesque.
on the question, Friedman's book, that's really old. I don't even think I've ever read it because it's so basic. But it talks about things like the documentary hypothesis for the writing of the Old Testament. I actually recommend people read The Bible Unearthed. Actually, is better because it's more up to date and briefer. And then if you want to go in more depth, it has a bibliography that can go further. But The Bible Unearthed is about like how the Bible is ahistorical, or to what extent it's ahistorical, and where the current status of consensus is by authors on these things, the authorship of the Bible and things like that. So that one's a little more up to date. I would recommend it. And for the New Testament, I would say Jesus Interrupted by Bart Ehrman, which is another more up to date version of that. But for people who really want to go in depth into who wrote the Bible, like the actual question of that, and look at something a little more like less 101 and more like serious, like scholarly reference stuff, there's this book series called The New Interpreter's Bible. And there's two books. One called the Old Testament Survey, and the other is called the New Testament Survey. And they're just a single book each. And it just has a chapter on every book in the Bible. And it talks about what is the current status of the field in terms of authorship, date, content, and all of that stuff. So I would recommend people who want to get serious into the scholarship of this, the New Testament Survey, the New Interpreter's Bible, Old Testament Survey, New Testament Survey. That's the place to go. For pop market sort of introductory stuff, Bible Unearthed is what I would recommend.
Okay.
Oh, and Jesus Interrupted for the New Testament. I should forget that there's two, but anyway.
Right.
Okay, cool. Hopefully you guys out there can write that down and go check those out.
Mm-hmm.
I have a recommendation page, by the way. So on my website at richardcarrier.info, one of the things at the top, one of the links at the top is recommendations. You can click in there and you'll see a list of possible sets. One is Origins of Christianity. And if you go in there, it lists the New Interpreter's Bible. It lists Jesus Interrupted, all this stuff and more. So people who want to see my recommendations, if you want to really study this stuff, I have a list there. And if you purchase through there, I get a commission and things like that. So check it out.
Okay, awesome. And also, Richard, before we went on live, you were mentioning that you have been like touring around the country and other areas and things. Can you tell us a little bit for our people who are listening there, like what you're up to and where you're going and what are you touring, things like that?
Well, I just finished my last tour, last tour of the year. So I have nothing planned specifically. I'm going to be doing, I tour every quarter, so I'm always on tour. I don't know exactly where I'm going to be, or what I'll be doing next year. But people who want to see, I come through many towns. So I might come through your town. I might just do a pub meet. You can come get a drink and hang out with me and just chat on all subjects or get a book signed or whatever. Sometimes I do debates, sometimes I do talks, but sometimes it's just me hanging out at a bar and anybody can come and hang out with me. And often like really cool, interesting people show up and it's a good time. So I'm doing that all over North America. And so keep your eye on my blog or my Twitter feed or Facebook wall. Follow one of those, whichever one you're more likely to see. And so every time I do a new article or something, I post on there, but also every time I'm going to appear anywhere, my appearances and my tours are announced there. So you'll see if I'm coming to your city or your state. Awesome.
Thank you so much for that information. Do you have any questions for us before we?
Yeah. Tell me about, are you working on another album? Like what's your sitch on that?
Oh, yes, you know it. We're almost done writing album 2, actually. We're on the final song.
So we're in the demo phase. So we still have to finish the demos, and then we'll actually take those into the studio and and record them, and
And
then
get our musicians.
Wow, you're close. Okay. No, I'm excited. I want to hear it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be. How would you describe it in comparison to the first? A
well,
little more ballsy.
yeah. So
Wow.
A
Really?
little more modern. A little more modern. I would say a little bit.
I think well, the other thing that we did with this album is we finished writing all the songs, and we're like, okay, we're gonna make them about 10 beats per minute faster.
Set them all up.
So
it's gonna be a pretty rocking album.
A little bit more. There's gonna be a little bit more. I think it's more fun
and more brutal. And more brutal.
Oh man, everything you're saying is great. I'm looking forward to this. Yeah. This is gonna be fantastic.
Yes,
Yeah.
I can't wait to put it out. It's still going to be a while because from the demo phase, as you're probably aware, when you're going, I don't know, it's probably similar to when you're writing to when it's actually published. This is basically, we got to go from the demo phase to when we go into the studio to recording it to actually releasing it. So
and there's a lot of money to be raised or figured out because it's expensive.
Yeah.
It's expensive.
Well, people should support you because this album sounds exciting. I want to hear it. So.
Awesome.
Yes, I think it's going to kick some ass. And I mean, definitely a lot of people have been enjoying our first album and they still do, which is great. And so that really encourages us. And I think we're just going to reach a broader audience with this next album.
Awesome.
And kick some ass.
Yes. I took screaming lessons for this album. And
like seriously screaming lessons, or are you just being sarcastic?
No, screaming lessons.
Okay.
I learned how to add that, so I'm going to be adding
There's
that.
There's not a whole lot of it on
There's
this
not a ton.
album.
Don't worry. This isn't turning into some screamo album. It's definitely going to be in a few select places.
Yeah, but you're taking the art.
Display that emotion.
That's fantastic.
Overall, I'm trying to just add a lot more dynamics to this one, some more soft and also some more like almost violent sounding, screams.
Wow. Okay.
So
yeah.
I think it's going to be a much better album. We're improving with every year that we're working on.
Not to say that I do think the first album definitely holds up and everything, but I think this is just the next step.
No, I mean, I totally get where you're coming from, and this is something I really like to hear. So can't wait.
Cool. All right. So thanks again, Richard, for being part of our show. So excited to have you on. Thank you so much. And if you guys who are listening want to learn more to support Richard's activism, please check out his website, www.richardcarrier.info, and follow him on social media.
We also have a Music Merchant More promo code going on at our monsteronsunday.com store. So click the link in the description box below to check it out. And please don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next time,
we're Monster on
Sunday!
Thanks for joining us on Godless Rockers. Bye, guys.
See ya.